Welcome to the Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host, and today we are being joined by someone very special. He is the originator, the creator behind the Curious Builder, in the sense that he inspired what we're about to discuss and talk about. And so I thought it was very fitting to give him a boxing-like intro. So here we go. Hailing from Phoenix, Arizona, via BYU educated brain, this 6'3", 205-pound Jordan wearing, toe wiggling sultan of social, the liker of LinkedIn, the papa of podcast. Welcome, Brad Leavittof.
That's amazing, Mark. I'm pretty impressed.
So, Brad, thanks for coming on the show.
I'm excited to be on. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Yeah. So obviously we're in Minneapolis, and our focus is pretty micro to Minneapolis, and you've got a pretty broad national reach. And so I'm guessing there's a lot of our new time show listeners here on the podcast that probably don't know a whole lot about you. So why don't you give us a quick 5-minute intro of who you are, what you do, and some of the businesses that you operate, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah. So I guess in general, I mean, most people that at least know us through social media know that we're a custom builder. We specialize in residential luxury construction. We over the years, we've done a lot of commercial, not as much as of late. So mostly high-end luxury. As you mentioned, I grew up in California as an electrician, born and raised. That's kind of my grandfather started an electrical company when he retired from the Navy. And so grew up in the trades and then decided to go do construction management in college up at BYU and then moved to Phoenix in 2005. And that's really what set the tone for my career path. I had a few young mentors that talked about chase experience, not money, and was fortunate to work on some pretty signature projects here in Phoenix. And shortly thereafter, after a good 7 years of working out of college, I ended up starting my company AFT. And we also have some other entities, as you kind of alluded to, from real estate to subcontracting companies, structural steel primarily, and a lot with social media and giving back to the industry. And I'm a father of 6. My wife and I, we have 5 daughters and a son, and my oldest is 18 in college and youngest is in kindergarten. So it's pretty busy between home and work.
Heartbreaker. You posted a picture of her the other day, and I've got 3 little kids, as you know, and oh man, those little girls, they melt the dad's hearts, man.
Oh, they do. They're amazing. And it's funny because they kind of take a turn when they're teenagers. They begin to hate dad, but then they come back around. So
I haven't gotten there yet. I'm not looking forward to that, but right now I'm just the little girls, they kill you. Even you see other dads, and you have a lot of respect for, obviously in all business owners that have families. It doesn't always have to be a little girl, but just dads are something special. And I think it was on your podcast the other day that one of your designers, was it the LA or the Las Vegas couple that designed that, they basically, one of their exclusions is that they don't like to have guests that both, I think, the husband and wife work. And the idea was that they wanted to be trusted to, respect what they did. And, if you're busy pursuing your career, you're more likely to let competent people kind of take over. I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it really goes back to understanding your ideal client. I think this is something that many of us kind of lose that angle, is that when you're building a business, no matter what that is, you have to understand, the cost to acquire customers, right? The cost to retain customers. And ideally, you should be marketing to that ideal client, because if you understand what that ideal client is through, project history and analysis in your database, that ideally, if you're marketing to them, and then when you're vetting clients accordingly, you should be lining up goal-wise with those clients. So then that way, it's a home run for both parties.
I really appreciate working, and maybe it's because you can relate to them. Obviously if they have a family, and being very family centric, not only in our personal life, but really a small business is like a family. And here in Minnesota, for what we do, we don't build quite as many homes. We do maybe 2 to 3 homes a year and a handful of remodels. And so for us, it's a very intimate relationship, not only with the client, but also with our team and our trade partners. We use pretty much the same people on every project for the last 2 decades. And so, everyone knows each other, and it's, like any family, there's, quote, fights and disagreements, but the camaraderie and the depth of respect and relationship is really special. It's something that we probably don't celebrate enough in our business, and maybe all businesses are that way, but I feel like construction is pretty strongly unique that way. Be curious your take on that. If you think all businesses are that close, or do you think that's a unique characteristic to building?
I definitely think it's a unique characteristic to building. I mean, keep in mind that we're building homes, right? So
Mm-hmm.
typically, there's families behind that to some extent. I mean, it could be people with no kids, they could have kids. I mean, everyone's at a different stage, but it's still their home. It's still where they're going to be. And so it's more personal. And I found too, having kids, that there is definitely a connection. And, I found too, as I look through the ideal client, especially for you and I, Mark, we're entrepreneurs. And so having clients that are entrepreneurs that have built their business and understand what it takes, there's an appreciation. Our business is really tough. It's really challenging in construction. So I love to have customers that understand just the grit that goes behind running, a company and being an entrepreneur, because there's a lot more respect, for that. And especially when when you have a family behind the scenes, my clients know that. I feel like they're a little bit more sensitive, maybe, not all of them, but most of them, as far as, personal time, as well as, just how they communicate with me, and understand the end goal, right? That I'm here for the long run. I got a long ways to go. And so it gives them the security they're looking for as well when they're selecting their builder.
Yeah, I often use it like, hey, my kids are 6, 4, and 2. I'm not going anywhere for at least 20 years. So,
Yeah. Got a long ways.
when they ask about warranty, I'm like, I'll be here for a couple of decades.
Yeah.
Plus, you enjoy what you do. You mentioned, picking your ideal client. I think this came up, and we'll talk a little bit more for those that aren't familiar with, how we met. We'll talk about that in a minute. But defining your client, I'll start with a red flag. I'd like to hear one. Maybe we'll each share one red flag that we sometimes gets, our attention when we're interviewing with people, and then maybe something we're really looking for, and something that I just observed recently. And this, when I say a red flag, it tends to be the rule. There's always exceptions, as we know, to the rule and what I'm about to say. But I've noticed, when I've built for all couples, all married couples. I think I built for one bachelor, so he would obviously be outside of this deal. But I find when the man is too involved in design, that it's very problematic for the build. And I'd say that sort of, kind of interestingly, because I've had a few gentlemen that they didn't listen to their wife, and it was very uncomfortable, because, as one of my designers once told me, happy wife, happy life. And he was telling that to me as I was building my own home. And I often tell my clients, like, don't feel bad. I don't get opinion in my own remodels as well. And I've told my wife one time, like, people pay me for my opinion. And I think her line back to me was, well, I'm not paying you. And I often tell that to the Mr. clients that we're talking about. And the ones that have been the most successful are the ones that, they're really supporting of their wife. And it's not that they're not involved. It's not that they don't have their opinion, but they really are deferring to, to their wife. And frankly, it seems like women just have a better taste than men anyway at baseline. So,
Yeah.
have you found that's a red flag, or have you experienced that in your career, or not really?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, right? Especially when, and I think what it goes down to is the core of it. A comment you mentioned in that, as you're vetting the client, Mark, as you said, when the husband's like interrupting,
Yeah.
or how they communicate with their spouse. I had an experience with an attorney that we were going through pre-construction, and I mean, he would yell at his wife right in a meeting, and I'm
Yell at
like,
her?
dang, yeah. And we're on the phone call, and he just got boisterous with his wife on this call we had with the architect, and right away I'm like, time out, I'm out. Like, if you're going to speak to your wife that way, especially in front of us, like, we're out. And but what's interesting is when you speak about our red flags, I mean, there's a lot, right? But I think one that really sticks out, especially at the level of complexity you and I are building, is when a client comes in and like, Brad, I don't need an interior designer. I know what I want. I know my style. Right away, it's
That's
like, time out. Like,
yeah.
so either one of two things happen. Either they hire a designer, and they work with us, or they don't, and they don't work with us. And the reason being is because what it comes down to is, yes, I do have appreciation for our interior designers and everything they do, but really what it comes down to is that when the client thinks they know what they want, that's great. But how do I interpret what's in your mind into construction? And that's the one gap that no client I've met with yet, and I shouldn't disparage all clients because maybe they have a background in this, but they're not doing the CAD. They're not, they may understand how to source and see images and have a taste for design, and that's fine because they can, but doing all the schematic, all the detailing we need so that there's no confusion and no misexpectation, that's the gap. And I always tell clients, look, you may know exactly what you want, and I'll find a designer that doesn't have an ego, but we still have to create a template to build from, and that'll just create a happy customer where you like me by the end of the
The
project.
only
So
thing worse than self-design is if someone says, I have a friend that
You're
that's
right.
like, oh boy. And they might be very accomplished, but and then you will vet. I mean, actually working with somebody right now, and she happens to be a professional designer, and she's great. And so luckily that person's friend was in the industry, and we obviously hired her, and it's been a great relationship. Going still focused here on AFT, I had a few questions for you. I believe you're at what, 17 employees now?
Yeah, and we hired one more at the summit, the last summit,
Oh,
so we're
did
at
you?
18 employees. Yeah.
Okay. Walk me through, we're a company of 4 or 5, and we struggle a little bit with what a lot of companies struggle with, which is kind of that growth curve. You know, we probably do 6 to 8 million a year in revenue. And I've been told, like, once you go to, let's say, 15 or 20 million, if you have that much work kind of backlogged, it's 2 to 3 times the staff. And like there's kind of that middle ground where you're not like fuel efficient in a car, if you will. Like you got to get up to speed. And so walk me through a little bit of like kind of the growth of your company. Like when you started, how many people did you first start with? And I guess how did you hire, and like how did that flow of people add? Like, did you know early on, because you'd been part of some bigger companies growing up, like seeing like larger staffs and like being like, hey, I know I'm going to want 10, 15 people at some point. I've never heard your story on how you got to be the size of people you are.
Well, I think it takes time, right? Keep in mind, I've been in business 10 years now. And so it definitely was not at this, this level of quality of talent and people, early on. You start and you're pretty much wearing a ton of hats as a builder, as a company owner, entrepreneur. What's really important as you're building your business is to really understand what's the end goal, right? And, especially as you speak to a lot of business coaches and people that make successful building their business, right? You have to have the end goal in mind. Essentially, you have to think about, well, what do I want to sell my company for? Is there value behind the brand, right? And maybe you're not. Maybe you're just doing it for a fee business. So you have to really understand the structure. And then more importantly, it's like, okay, what do I value, right? If I value time as a homeowner, if I want time, whether it be to travel or whether it be to have time with my family or kids events, I'm not going to be able to be where the roles of superintendent and accounting and marketing. And so I have to build that. And what that means is, yeah, there's going to be more cost involved by hiring people. But again, it's where do you value? I know some people that I'm friends with in Phoenix, and they're a one-man band, for lack of a better word. They're running, 3 or 4 projects by themselves. They're doing all the hats and they're making really good money, but they don't, have any personal life. And that's fine. That's what they
Mm-hmm.
want. That's their goal. And so I think part of it is just understand what drives you, right? And for me, it's building in people, it's building a community, it's building team culture, and that's always been a thing. But to get to that, if that really is your goal, where you have maybe a little flexibility to have time um, for these other ventures, there's a cost to it, and then you have to understand the outline. It's the systems, and too many of us don't spend any time building systems and organization, and having project descriptions and position descriptions where people really understand, what their role is in the company.
When you talk about systems, I remember you had, I can't remember his last name. I think his name was Jace. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. And
Chase Maven.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and just like this idea of like, creating systems, and me essentially never having a boss, never being part of a corporate structure. I guess the things that make entrepreneurs successful is that they're unemployable, so they're forced to do something. But how did you navigate that from the standpoint? I mean, did you have a system in place and then you kind of filled it? I mean, is it more organic, like, hey, you saw a need and you sort of organically grew? Or, for me, it was, I guess if I was to do it, I would say, hey, I'm going to go get a sale or two, so I know like I've got the revenue coming in, and then I would build the team around that, let's say, bigger event or bigger home or bigger project that you're working on. Or if are you going to borrow money and build the team before you have the project? It's kind of a cart and the horse, as they say, or chicken and egg. How did you navigate that?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that if you need someone today, it's too late, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there has to be planning, there has to be sales that back up the revenue side that can control the cost. So there's a couple things. So what I've found is that yes, I may be working in pre-construction on a project that's going to go, and it's not like I just hire someone because for this project, you don't want to be in that scenario. Ideally, you're planning your growth. You understand what your bottom line is, your job costing, and then again, what's going to be your total revenue? Can you bill for that? Can you account for that? And so what I've done at success in the past, especially these past couple of years, is that when I know the need's going to be coming, say 6 or 8 months down the road, and that we're positioning the growth of the company, I'll hire that person early. So a lot of times, at least my last 3 hires, the employee came on, they could shadow. So they could shadow other team members. They could learn the system. They can learn the operations, for 3, 4, 5 months, 6, 7 months. Even I had my director of operations came in and shadowed for almost 8 months. And it was great because he was fully trained. So then when we were ready, we were good to go. But keep in mind, that was not always the case. When you speak about, this company we have now, well, early on, I struggle like everyone else. I just bring them on, say, go figure it out, kick them off the pier, sink or swim.
Yep.
And my turnover was high, right? The retention was tough. People, were discouraged. It's a hard business building a custom home. It's hard working with the clients and, our trade base and pricing. And there's so many metrics that we're dealing with. And so kicking them off the pier just didn't work. And then I realized, okay, a couple key people came in and said, Brad, we need to create some structure. And the more structure we created, and the more we position ourselves with sales and revenue to bring on people and bring them on early, well, then you kind of hit your stride.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just because I know you a little bit from what you've discussed, it sounds like most of your builds are on a hill. Just kidding. For those listening, Brad's always talking about hillside, which I think is a community, but we were giving him a hard time about it because it made it sound like every single house he built was at an angle or something. But your permits, I mean, a lot of your permits down in Arizona take like a year. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, they can, especially with the hillside and especially with FEMA, as you mentioned. I know we had a laugh
Yeah.
about that, but dealing with like flood zones and stuff. I mean, it's very common.
But what
I
I
mean,
like,
we've
sorry, what I like about that is that gives you a huge on ramp to your point of bringing on this person to shadow. Like that job is, in pre-con, you've already, I assume you've either designed it. I mean, if you're going in for a permit, you must have already gone through architecture and design and some of that early pre-con stuff. So now you're kind of onboarding. You can, and there's got to be plenty of downtime on a bigger project like that where you could do, I assume, a couple. If you're taking a year, I mean, someone's not working on that project every single day for a year, or at least not the entire day, I would assume. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so it gives someone ample time to kind of get in the swing of things. So when that project's underway, they're not only caught up to speed, but they're already kind of intuited with what everyone else is doing in the program.
That's exactly right. I mean, the whole goal is it, and instead of saying, okay, Mark, this job's starting in 2 weeks, breaking ground. Here you go. Here's all the plans and specs. Get familiar with it. Like it's really difficult, especially as you get into more complex projects. So the more they can be involved early on and be involved in contracting and scope, so writing all the scope and contracts, and then working through pool plan scheduling, right? Working through the schedule. Now you can create this really organic process for the client through pre-construction. And that way, when you break ground, you hit the ground running and you're not waiting on decisions. You're not delaying. It doesn't mean the clients don't change the project, but at least you have a template there.
This is really interesting in your market. I think it's, here, permit is, if you're not variances can take 3-4 months probably, but, a permit here is anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. So I mean, it's pretty fast. I mean, it's pretty aggressive. And, I mean, I've been building for 18 years, when I think now in retrospect, I mean, I have a lot of systems in place that I could do now. And I think this was mentioned by very competent people. Like everyone on the outside looks like they just got it dialed in, but everyone on the inside of their house is a bit of a hot mess. And it's kind of like, sometimes I can, I'm a pretty optimistic person, but it's really inspiring to be around people that just have incredible systems and incredible background or incredible stories. And it's like, one of the reasons why I listen to so many podcasts now, because I started with yours, is, you're going to get 2 to 3 ideas out of each one, but making sure that it doesn't discourage you. It's very encouraging to be like, okay, it's never a better day than today to start implementing something that's going to change. And really, if you've been in business for more than a couple of years, you're doing something right. And don't be discouraged. Just make one change at a time. And I mean, it sounds simple, but I think that's where you got to start, because otherwise it's just daunting and overwhelming.
I love that you brought up that. Sorry, Mark, you might have to edit that. Sorry.
Yeah, that one's no worries.
I'm glad you brought up that point, because the reality is, I had an architect teach me this. He says so many times, we focus on our failures, right? And it's pretty easy. Mistakes made, maybe an unhappy client, maybe a project that didn't go as planned. But we have so many successes. Like mentally, why don't we focus on the successes? Because most people around us don't care about the failures. Like, especially from afar, Mark, you may have a client that's kind of dragging you emotionally through this process, and it's frustrating for you and your team. But like, I look at the brand you're building and your personality and the product you're putting out there, and the intent of this podcast, the Curious Builder. And so you give a lot of energy that I'm like, man, I want, there's things I'm learning from Mark. I want to be like Mark, and I appreciate what you're doing for the industry. And so you have so many cheerleaders. They might not say that all the time, but so many of us do get stuck in this like mental trap of being an entrepreneur, because it's really hard being an entrepreneur. It's really hard running a business. It's really hard keeping spirits up of your entire team and clientele.
hmm I mean, I think that, and maybe now is a good time to talk about even how we met and talk a little bit about, the Contractor Coalition. But, having peers in your network. I mean, I've always been a very social person, but I think the last, man, a couple of years, I've completely awakened to not only is it something I really enjoy, so it's much easier to do something you enjoy, but just the power of the network to be encouraged. I mean, I think I'm a big sports player. I know you are as well, but it's essentially this team approach. Like, you can be a competitor against another team, however, you can respect the camaraderie that you can have as kind of brothers in arms. And I feel like, and I could be wrong in this, but I feel like the older generations, like my dad was a builder and they didn't have the social media. I think we talk a lot about, there's a lot of media out there about negative social media aspects. And I think that's certainly something we all have to balance. But I think on the positive side is, like, you and I would never have been friends. We never would have met. And there's so many different avenues that you can support one another. And I think this term now that, whether it's you or Morgan or Nick that coined it, I say it now a lot, but this, collaboration over competition, and like the idea that we are simply, you're going to build with somebody or buy a product. I don't care if you're a builder or not, whatever your industry is. At the end of the day, if you can get it down to that they want to work with you because it's a relationship, and that's something that I would rather be involved with versus like price or a widget or something else. And I think that then therefore, if you're quote competing against somebody, you're just different. Every person is different. It's like, with little kids right now, trying to explain to my daughter that she doesn't need a best friend. Like, that's too limiting. Like, you can have friends. You don't have to have a single one. I think that's a little bit like, having peers in your business. Like, they can all be successful business owners. There's enough work to go around and we can celebrate other people's success. Why would we need to bring it down?
I love that you shared it that way, because the thing is, like, in our industry, it's tough, right? As we mentioned, Mark, it's a tough to be in design in a fee industry. And so having that support. And then the reality is, why do I have to make every mistake myself? Like, so I'm building through this. Why can't I learn from my peers? Why
Yeah.
can't I learn from something Mark's doing? Or maybe you just may have a better widget, for lack of a better word. You may have a better process. You may have a better, application of something I'm struggling with. And why not collaborate on that? And, going back to how we met through the Coalition Summit, it's interesting because I've had a lot of builders attend from my market, right, at both events. And I've never worried about, hey, these are direct competitors, because the reality is, as a building industry, the more sophisticated we can all be as business owners, that's going to make us better. It's going to make the community better. It's going to make a better process for our clients and our trade partners. And why not, right? I think there's just too much upside as opposed to the downside.
And for those listening that don't know what the Contractor Coalition is, um, it basically, from I can give it from a someone who's attended it, and actually one of my questions here is to ask you about how it was born and a little bit of its, or where do you see it going. But essentially, it's a group of 30 to 40 builders put on by essentially yourself, Nick Schiffer from NS Builders, and Morgan Molitor from Minnesota from Construction to Style, and it's basically a 3-day sit down open book. You talk about every single thing is on the table, and you don't need to sign an NDA or any of that stuff. It's just really what have lessons learned. And I remember when the entry fee to get in, I think it was $10,000 at the time that I signed up into Nashville. And I remember wanting to be a part of a Builder 20, which I'm not a part of, and I'm gonna down to the Builder show here this year, and I want to sign up for one. But anyway, the idea was simply like, is it worth my investment? And I called Morgan because she was at least in Minnesota. I didn't know you were Nick at the
Right.
time, and I
Right.
called Morgan. I said, hey, I want to go, but I'm not someone who wants to just sit in a classroom and just, be fed stuff or like, a pamphlet. I don't learn that way. I need to interact. I need to ask questions. I'm a curious guy. And so, and so, um, and she said, you will pay for your ticket in the first half hour. And it was 10 minutes in and I paid for it. And I know I've been I've given you guys many testimonials based on that, but it's true. And I went back a second time because that information sunk in so much deeper. So anyone out there listening, it's incredible what you guys have done, and it's really inspiring. Um, yeah. So anyway, from your point of view, I'd love to hear, how it was born, and then also kind of, it sounds like you're unrolling maybe 4 or 5, for next year. What your long term plans with this are, because it's really incredible what you're doing.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, even the vendor side, right? The vendors who have attended have kind of the same, feeling you have, Mark, that they're like, it's great to be around, something of this magnitude in the industry, right? Especially on national level. And so going back to what's interesting is, I've been really big. I'm always big on relationships. I'm big on networking. I'm big on, um, and again, it's just, I think there's a lot of value, right, in whether you call it legacy, whether you call it communication, whether you call it friendship. It's just you're not doing it alone. And so through that, I've been pretty active on social media for the last 6-7 years. Been fortunate to be, because of the activity on social media, that's how I got into my Builder 20 group. I've been connected with vendors, and so I just see that in this industry where COVID was a great example. We're dealing with challenges unprecedented. Can't get material, labor's tough, and through these relationships built with vendors that I'm getting product that I need in a timely manner. And so there's just a lot of these things that came together. And so the bottom line is that people would follow me and say, "Hey, Brad, can I come shadow you?" And I'm kind of, I'm, I don't, I, it's not scatterbrain because I'm not scatterbrain, but I have my way of doing things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I have my way of organizing my day, and I'm very structured and calendar obsessed, and, and I have my team. And so the reality is, for someone to come shadow me, yeah, every day is different. I don't have the time commitment, even if they're like, "Hey, I'll pay to come shadow you." And I'm like, well, and so my wife would see this, that people are, I still want to help people. Like in between, I try to get on a quick call to help them out, whatever it may be. So at the end of the day, I'm like, I just don't have the capability to shadow all these people reaching out, wanting to come to Phoenix. And so Ashley's like, my wife, she's like, "Why don't you do in the design community?" They're doing this. They're doing these design camps, and designers come in and they teach them, all things design related and how to set up a relationship with a manufacturer and do furniture. And so she's like, "Why don't you do this?" So I'm like, "Okay, I'm in." So I went to BizCom where,
Mm-hmm.
You went this past one, but I spoke at BizCom a year and a half ago. And I went to Morgan. She put on this A-class event, and I said, "Look, Morgan, here's my idea. I've been wanting to put on this like builder summit. I think there's a lot of value, a lot of things I wish I knew when I started my company. We don't have anything like this in the industry that's really educating young contractors, or even contractors like you and I, Mark, that have been in the business for a long time, on just better ways, right, to be successful. And from all things social media to all things marketing to all things structure of your business." And she's like, "I'm in." And then I'm like, "Well, I need someone to collaborate with that's kind of a different market as well, that can help teach, a lot of the sessions." And so Nick and I have been friends for a long time. And I know Nick's big on, the community as well and the industry. And so of course I called him. He was in a couple minutes. And so that's how it started. Is I called Morgan, I called Nick, we formatted it. Nashville is our first location, which you went to. And then, yeah, moving forward, this is something that's continued to grow with, vendors who are partnering and wanting to collaborate with their network and just create this mastermind community of builders, throughout the country.
I mean, I'm a bit of an optimist, and if you need someone to run sales on this thing, I nominate myself because when you believe something, man, can you sell it? Because I think you could almost quit building, and this thing could be like a full-time educational tour. I mean, this is incredible information. And have you guys talked about like how in the world? I mean, there's a finite amount of time that you guys have to put on. I mean, I'm sure you guys have had some brainstorm sessions, but I mean, how many of these can you do? And even, if you're doing 20 to 30, I mean, you could do this for the rest of your life and never have that many repeats. Now you have, obviously somebody like myself who, would like to go to every single one. And now at some point I'm gonna have to stop coming. But,
Yeah.
and I know Nathan from the Bison Group and myself are on you guys to try to create some sort of alumni
Yep.
gathering, which I think is going to be really cool. And if you guys don't do it, you'll probably just have a bunch of stalkers or groupies showing up, uninvited. But I mean, it's a really powerful event. I mean, it's pretty special. And for anyone out there listening, highly recommend it. I don't care if you've been building for, if you don't, even if you've never been a builder, I mean, I can't imagine what a leg up you'd have if you went to this. But whether it's 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, I mean, it's extremely impressive what you guys are doing. And I know people will be like, how great could it be? And all I can say is go and you'll find out.
Yeah. Well, we do want to continue to, from more frequency as well, break it down a little bit more. And, we want to continue to refine, the summit and make it better and more feasible. And, we've gone back and forth that, is this something we pursue full time? I think there's part of that, but I think part of it's a little tough too, because at least, as it is now, you know, it's one thing, to still be involved in the business enough to understand, what the attendees are dealing with, what you're doing with Mark or myself or my team. And because currently, I have clients, I have projects, I know what the market's doing. There's definitely, I don't want to say a leg up, but there is some value of the experience I'm continuing to gain building and owning the company that now can go into as we teach, right, these summits.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's something we'll continue to do. I never want to get out of building. I love it too much, as tough as it is. And I love building companies. I love seeing people be successful. I love seeing my team members be successful at my company, and cheer for them. I love seeing builders such as yourself, Mark, just come and kind of catch that wave and continue to grow their brand. It's awesome. I mean, to me, that's like super fulfilling.
I know you've mentioned this on many podcasts, but for those that haven't heard it, the silent salesman, to quote yourself, and I think you got it from a book, but essentially it's people that are not on your payroll that are promoting your company. And so my new joke with you is going to be, I'm not very silent. I mean, pretty loud salesman. So, but anyway, I think that's a pretty powerful statement. I think that goes just back to networking and celebrating others, which, I think when you lead by example, it's pretty impressive. One thing I wanted to ask you a little bit about, and I meant to ask it a little bit earlier, but you have a company of 17 people, and this came up at the summit, and I didn't understand, self-performing work. So we're a small company. We don't self-perform work, meaning I don't have a bunch of trimmers, carpenters, warranty people on staff that do that. And I understand there's pros and cons to that. Nick from NS Builders, he's launching a really interesting warranty program, right? I think it's 2 or 3 people. It's like $15,000 a year. He wants to, kind of give his clients a white glove service, but now he's kind of, it's part of building his brand. It's going to be mandatory and people are loving it, right? I was curious what you guys do for warranty. And to my knowledge, I don't think you guys self-perform much work. And I was curious why and what your take on it is. Because I guess my platform is more similar to yours. I've always, wanted to be more flexible. So I'd rather subcontract or pick it, but there certainly are some cons to that as well. And so I'd just be curious your thoughts on, self-performing versus not, especially in the warranty side of things, as these homes get so big and, a lot of your clients, are out of town for, large amounts of time.
Yeah, so there's 2 parts to that. I think going to the self-performance, and we'll get back to warranty, is that um, it can be tough, right? It can be tough to self-perform. And because our projects are so unique, in the sense that I have some builds that are 14 months and some that are 28, and then some that are, 4,000 square feet and some that are 60,000, right? There's such a versatility in the projects that we're building and the size that it's really hard to be able to either ramp up or ramp down with core people. And I do know other builders that have been successful. For me, there's only so much time in the day, right? And if we can find our core strength as a company, and we know our core clientele, our ideal client, we know our core marketing strategy, we understand our core project that we're successful at, that's what we're catering to. We're catering to those people and those projects that we know that we can have success with. And through that, I know that I have the subcontractor base. And so it's always been strategy for me, is to focus on that aspect. And it has allowed unique growth. It has allowed, a different, I would say, trajectory as a company by focusing on just the general contracting side as opposed to sub-performance. Now, with that said, all of my supers do have some capability. A lot of them were craftsmen at some point before they came to join me, and then had to learn the leadership and mentor and management side. Yeah, Paul's one with AFT, AFT Construction 2 on social media, and Mark Dawson. I mean, a lot of my people, pretty much all of them, they have the skill set to put on their tool bags and do some things. Now, they're not going to go install a trim package in a house, but they can take care of anything from drywall to trim to cabinet touch-ups. So
on a detailed business point of view, would that be outside their scope? So I don't know your rates down there, but let's just say, a trimmer is, 55, $65 an hour. If he's going to go and self-perform some of that, would you track that time? And then, because it's a cost plus, it'd be no different than you hiring a trimmer to come in and do that, but he can do it right then and there. Or is that just something that they do to keep the job moving? Or how do you balance that exactly?
yeah, that's a good question. And typically we're talking about small things, but when they are bigger, which does happen on occasion, being that we're a cost plus builder, I do have a line item called punch list mechanic. And essentially that is for, hourly rates at a rate that's agreed upon in our contract. And the punch list mechanic is just a more fancy word, but the reality is there's always these scope gaps and there's always the gray area and there's always things that have to be done. And that's where we can build to that line to cover some of those costs, especially if the super is putting on their tool bags on a weekend or after hours to catch up and keep the project on track. Going back to the warranty, something we're doing as well. And you met Andrew Patterson. So Patterson, who's there in Newport, He's worked a long time on this customer care program. Now, truth be told, there's a lot of builders here locally in Scottsdale. There's a lot in Newport. There's a lot of my Builder 20 group from Charleston and all over that do like a customer care program. And essentially, in markets where clients have second homes, they're gone a lot. And even for those that are there full time, that may not maintain their home like they should, these are essentially service agreements where you're going to be doing, the client could do them and get reminders, or you could go do them, whether it be cleaning air filters or power washing driveways or, decks and unclogging rain gutters. I mean, shower drains and, flushing out water heaters from the calcium buildup of hard water. I mean, all these little things you have to do to maintain your home. So we're actually going to be beta testing and working with Patterson on this customer program over the next 2 years and implement it. It's something that I've wanted. We warranty our homes, but this will keep a lot more organized and formatted for our clients.
So I don't quite understand that. So you're going to be subcontracting the warranty out, or you're
Good
creating
question.
or you're creating a program like Andrew Patterson?
Okay, so most people have their own system, whatever that may be. What Patterson's done, think of it like Build-A-Trend. A lot of us go to Build-A-Trend because it's a project management software, and we can use from to-do list to daily logs and scheduling and all this stuff on Build-A-Trend. Essentially, Patterson has created his own software.
Oh,
So
wow.
he actually has his own software that you go in, you put in your database, you have client info and addresses, and you have the normal services. So say that the client buys a gold plan and they're going to pay, like you said, so Nick's been doing this, Mark, with Patterson.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say the client pays 15 grand a year for their gold plan. And what that means is it includes, X number of filter changes, X number of, cleaning out the gutters or whatever, servicing equipment on the house, the normal stuff, right? And there's a whole list that is done. So the software automates the payments, and then it also helps someone track to schedule, hey, we're up for this maintenance go, and we have someone that goes and takes care of that. Additionally, there could be some extras, right? That could be a la carte, like, hey, I want my windows cleaned, right? In Arizona, we get these monsoons. And so after monsoon season, we could have a few different window companies bid and say, we'll come clean the windows for $800. And so in the database software, our trade partners have access to the database, and we say, hey, this client is looking for their $800 window clean, and someone could claim that, and then they go do it and we manage it. So really what I'm implementing is that we'll still be self-performing all the warranty. We'll still be managing it with our base in Arizona, but I'm using the software that Patterson's created over the last few years.
Interesting. Huh. That was funny. I was just making a note here. There's a company here called Cura Home Maintenance. I use them on my own home, and we've been using it as like a closing gift lately, to basically gift our clients like a 2 or 3 year extended warranty where they'll come 4 times a year. And I looked at doing some warranty, and at the time it was like, for me it was like, a couple $100,000, a Sprinter van, also the personnel, the software. I mean, they were just really impressive. I still like the branding, and there's a part of it that, like Nick, I would love, big picture to control all of it, but there's also so much time in the day. And it's like, I think the root of my entrepreneurial, I guess, organization has always been to subcontract out with good people versus trying to self-perform it all. And so I've decided, a couple of years ago not to do that. But anyway, that's interesting. If we took a look at it again, we'd probably reach
Well,
out.
what's interesting is ideally, because I don't want to self-perform. I just really don't. It's not part of my business model. I mean, just personally, I'm just not a whole lot interested in it. And just it's another aspect to manage. And there's already enough to manage in the complexity of our projects that I don't need that. But the warranty is important because one, it protects the brand. Your tail gets longer with every house you build. And so you always want to protect the client too in their investment. And you want to protect yourself from possible future issues. Maybe a client doesn't maintain it or say they didn't. I mean, whatever comes up, the normal maintenance. And so it's just another white glove, another feather in the cap or something for the client to say, yeah, I want to go with Mark or Brad because they're going to take care of me well beyond the build. And then the software helps organize it in a way where it's just not heavy lifting for me.
Yeah, that sounds great. I had a question, and we need to do a 5-part mini series to get all the stuff I want to talk about with you. So we're not gonna have that kind of time today. And if people are more interested, you've talked a lot about social media, and I call you, I mean, you are the sultan of social. I mean, you've got an incredible following, and you do a great job. And for those that are interested, check out all your handles. We'll have them listed in the notes at the end too. But essentially, I think the bottom line is be consistent, and I think that's my number one takeaway with your social strategy. So we're not going to focus on that today. What I wanted to ask you about was your podcast. I know why I started my podcast. It's kind of unique because I'm having you on, and I was on your podcast in August after we met. You had me on, and it was a really enjoyable experience. I had such a fantastic time on it, and I was actually a speech comm major, which you wouldn't know because I'm so quiet at your gatherings. And I was like, I could do this. And but even if it was a miserable failure, I would just enjoy talking with people because I'm very curious. And obviously we named this show the Curious Builder. It was pretty self-fulfilling there. But why did you start a podcast, and what was your inspiration? And I guess because I've called you a few times with some ideas as we're about to unroll here. By the time this podcast releases, we'll have about 5 or 6 episodes out there. We're pre-recording a few, just to have some bullets in the gun, if you will. But tell me a little bit about your journey into creating your podcast and where you find yourself now.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've been fortunate to meet some amazing people, right, over the years. Very interesting people, unique stories. Again, some of my clients are pretty interesting, right, that I have the fortune to build for. And so a lot of people said, Brad, like, why don't you do a podcast? I think, there's a lot of information you share on your social channels. And so it's just and so my whole intent was like, okay, well, maybe, there's some value as I put this out there. And one of my issues as I listen to podcasts, and that's why I like the context of this conversation, Mark, is you've really dove into like, everything from marketing strategies to operations and, business growth. And I found that there were a lot of podcasts at the time, years ago, that were very much like just surface, like two friends talking and what's your story? How do you get into this? And, the whole hour becomes that. And I'm like, what did I really gain, listening for this hour? Not much. And so I would tune out. And so I've always been big, and you'll see this listening to mine, and you came on, Mark, where it's very similar. I mean, the client comes on and I kind of know that they have their specialty, whatever that is, and we're going to dive right into it. And what I found was that a couple things happened that I didn't realize is one, um, it became an education platform for my clients. So my clients listen. And so now I have clients that come to me and say, Brad, okay, I've listened to your podcast. I got to get a designer. I got to get an architect.
Mhm.
So now it's creating the ideal client. They listen, they understand what makes a project successful. So that's one aspect. Number two, my guests share things. Like I had Matt Reisinger and something that he shared. We're going through Cost Plus, and I'm like, Matt, how do you do this with a client where, they want 3 bids for everything? They want 3 bids for, concrete, because he had his key people. And he said, I don't. He said, if it's a life safety project, if it's life safety of the house where, I can be sued or I can lose my license or go to jail, framing, waterproofing, concrete excavation, these items, I get one. And then a couple of weeks later, I'm doing this incredibly large project with the client. He has a building consultant, like a third party management company that's going to be involved, like our owner's rep. And the owner's rep, one of his fundamental things in his contract is you get 3 bids for every line item. And so I sat there and I said, no, I said, I'll give you 3 for cabinetry, I'll give you 3 for paint, but I'm giving you 1 for the main components, because this is a very complicated build with a lot of, unique items. And he looked at me and he's like, okay, that's fine. And the owner was fine. And so you get this confidence. So that's one aspect. And then, selfishly, yeah, there's more, all my guests, they have a network, they reshare that. And it's opened up other doors, and you become a thought leader in the industry, for lack of a better word. And, it's opened up my network and opportunities. And so, I found that there's just a lot of value from the podcast. And, it is the one part I do love is when people reach out, listeners that reach out pretty frequently and like, hey, Brad, just appreciate what you're doing. I've learned X, Y, and Z from these episodes, and, it's been super valuable. And, and so, yeah, that's really the thought behind the origination and kind of what it's grown to.
Oh, that's interesting. It's I would say the thing that I've also enjoyed is hearing people's stories. We had one of my designers on, Bridget Shrigus, and I've known her for a couple of years now. And she told me a story that, again, I know you're sitting here, it's kind of like it's, one-on-one conversation. You're kind of maybe going deeper than you would on certain things. And she's like, yeah, I actually went to school for fashion. And she told a story about dumpster diving for furniture to repurpose it. And I think some of the really unique things come out of some of the podcasts. And like you, I wanted it to be educational. I try, not always successfully, I'm guessing, but I try to keep in my back of my mind's eye of who's listening. And I enjoy listening to yours specifically because I'll usually get 2 to 3 ideas out of it. from, from the client or from you, obviously. But as you listen to a person's voice, one of my questions to you is, how do you do you ever have to worry about becoming, stale with like repetitious questions? Because a lot of times, I'm asking people the origin story, but because each person you're interviewing is so different, it seems to me that there's always going to be a unique spin on it. Have you ever kind of analyzed yourself and being like, well, I asked similar questions, but because the answers are different every time, it's okay?
Yeah, and that part can be tough, right? Especially as I'm like, okay, if I'm bringing on builder X and designer Y and architect Z, how many questions can I ask someone, different architects or different designers specifically? And so there is some of that. I think at the core of it, a lot of people have unique experiences to share, right? And whether it's their story, their life experience, how they got in the industry, and there is application, right? And really, as you mentioned, the goal is to get a couple nuggets out there for each people. But at the same time, it's really important that, yes, I'm going to have a core of listeners that listen to every episode and have, right? And that does happen. But you do get a lot of people that either dabble or they listen to one here, one there. And so it's okay to repeat. Like people listen to me, I say it all the time, right? Chase experience, not money, and silent salesman. And
Yep.
there's some recurring things, but it's very applicable. And I do want to drive home those topics. So maybe they're delivered in a different way, but the listener can at least understand the value of what we're presenting, and that's okay that we're resharing that to some extent. But yeah, you don't want to just be like a parrot repeating yourself,
Well,
but
of
at the same
course, yeah.
time, yeah,
But
yeah,
I was curious, and actually, I thought this was a unique question. Then Nick on the Modern Craftsman, I believe yesterday, said this, and I was this, this will be kind of interesting. But he's like, and I feel the same way. Like sometimes I feel selfish because I am asking questions that I want the answer to because I'm dealing with it in my
right
business right
now,
now. Like basically, my
yeah,
guest is my business coach, and I'm not paying them
yeah,
for this advice. Although it
yeah,
could be really bad advice, I guess. And but I'm just like, man, I'm dealing with this issue. And I guess what's ever presently on your mind or you're really dealing with, like for us, we've had, a couple of position changes. And, I know your mantra, excuse me, is hire slow and fire fast. And I'm pretty good at doing the opposite. I'm really good at hiring really fast. And then I'm too loyal to, not too loyal. I don't know if you can be too loyal to somebody, but I'm just like, just really patient sometimes. And, and then, that person is gone. And then people come up to you and be like, oh man, you know, ever since they've been gone, it's been so much better. And this is why. I'm like, well, why didn't you say anything before? Like, and they're like, well, we didn't really know. And it's like, sometimes you feel like that person is the only person for that role. And, you need to trust your instincts. And if your instincts are telling you something different, there's other people out there that are probably saying the same thing. And it could damage your reputation if you hold on to something that essentially is affecting your corporate culture.
yeah. And the reality is, and that's again going back to the podcast, selfishly, as we're dealing with things as you and I, Mark, when I have a guest, and I had again Jeremy Andrews, who owns Traeger Grills. I've tried to always bring guests too that are outside of the building industry because it's really focused on, at the end of the day, you and I are business owners. And I say this all the time, we're business owners. We're not, we are contractors, but we just business owners have a focus in construction, and
Agreed.
we have to
Yep.
understand the core of that. And so I had Jeremy Andrews, who owns Traeger, and when he talked about company culture, and he made a comment, he's like, I don't care how valuable and how talented the person is. If they're bad for the company culture, get rid of them. It
Yep.
doesn't work. Like it'll sour the company. And the next day I terminated my accountant like
Yeah.
that fast. And it just unfortunately, like, you have to have these guests on that, speak about the successes to company culture and ideologies of running a business. And then you apply those. And then ideally, you create a nice core for yourself.
I think it was interesting. And I'd mentioned this in episode 0 of just some of the inspirations as we've started our podcast. And you shared a little bit. I mean, obviously, we have sponsors, they're listed on our website as well at curiousbuilderpodcast.com. But, we've got Pella, NRD, we've got Alpine Hardwoods, and there's a number of others that are joining as well. And I think early on, I mean, we were getting sponsors before we ever had a podcast, which you were really encouraging me of how to do that, or just, what the value is. But a lot of it, ultimately, I think they're basing their value or the return on investment of, essentially my relationship with them. And you want to go on above and beyond for your sponsors. Walk me through a little bit about how you essentially validate your sponsors' trust in not only your podcast but your brand. And with this thought that you always want to give your sponsors more than they even paid for, because that loyalty is a two-way street.
Yeah, and there's a lot of appreciation I have for our vendors and those we collaborate with, right? Because at the end of the day, having good products, that align with my brand is the end goal here. And having a personal relationship where I could call them when I'm in a bind and vice versa, and deliver a marketing reach well beyond what they had anticipated. There's collaboration, and a lot of brands are looking for a different way. Anyone could put an ad on TV that's extremely costly. They can go print media, but at the end of the day, every company, manufacturers looking, well, who's our ideal client? How do we get to them? Who has that reach? And so there is some collaboration with someone such as yourself, Mark, that has a great footprint and reputation in your area, and you're looking to build the industry, and they can partner with you locally. And there's a lot of, reciprocation that they'll get on the backside. And so the vendor side is really important to me. And we support them in many ways when they open new showrooms and have events and help our clients understand what they're putting out. Because just like the silent salesman, if I'm selling their brand, I'm not on their payroll. Yeah, they may be, coordinating with me on some aspects of the business, but at the end of the day, it's increasing their reach as well.
Something that I think it was Tyler Grace, one of the co-hosts of the Modern Craftsman with Nick Schiffer, is I met him at BizCom, and we had a couple interesting interactions. I can't wait to see him again. But anyway, he gave me a really interesting piece of advice that I've employed immediately, which was, he wanted to make sure that his sponsors got a very good value for what they wanted. And a lot of the podcasts, obviously like old style radio, or I guess current style radio, is, ad reads, and we certainly have those. But he thought, because there was such a video demand in the industry, that he wanted to also do, like, hey, for a main sponsor, I'm going to do a quarterly video that's dedicated to you, that's going to live on our our various social channels. And so I've done that for our main sponsors, and we actually, on our website, we have a 3-tier sponsorship um kind of platform where people can invest at different levels, and then I'll show like different video commitments. And I think you've been real helpful in addition to that, of realizing that we don't have a massive following, but we have an extremely active following. And I think, whether you want to call them micro influencers, or it doesn't really matter, it's just like you have these incredible fans. A lot of them are past clients, a lot of them are current relationship vendors, and but it just, there's a lot of activity. And you kind of used it's nice to have a huge following, but it's a bit of a vanity metric sometimes. Can you speak a little bit to those out there that are looking maybe at their Instagram or YouTube or any of their handles and being like, hey, I have 1,000 or 1,500, and they look at someone else and they have 200,000. I'm like, well, in today's world, I'm never going to get there. How do you encourage those people?
Yeah, it goes back to what you said, consistency, be consistent, right? I mean, for me, yeah, there's other users that have more, but today I'll be making my 25th hundred, 2,500 posts on Instagram. Thing is, that's a lot of posts over years and years. The thing is like, but to your point, it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, vanity metric, it's great that I could have, a 500,000 followers, whatever that number may be. But are they clients? No, I mean, I only need 15 of my followers that are
Right.
real
Yeah.
clients that want to hire me, that
Yeah.
have been following me over the year.
Yeah.
So right now, I think we're closing in on 145,000 on Instagram. But then the day, there's clients that reach out, hey, Brad, we're going to build with you someday. And it's a handful. I can't bill for 145,000 people. I can bill for 15. So ideally, it's okay. It's quality. Yeah, there is some aspect to the quantity aspect, but you're looking for quality, right? At the end of the day, and there's a lot of vendors that don't just want to work with companies that have a ton of followers. There's micro influencers that have 10,000 and 15,000, even 4,000, because they have a loyal following.
In Minnesota, and we're going to run out of time here, but we have a very strong builder base. Minnesota Housing First been around a long time. Our Parade of Homes, which we've spoken out before on your podcast, back in August. But there's a lot of builders that I don't have any idea who they are. And they do extremely high-end work. They have relationships with a few of the highest end architects in Minneapolis, St. Paul, but they have a zero like footprint. Like, I'll drive by one of these homes and I'm like, that's like a $5-6 million house. And it'll be a builder I've never heard of before. And they just have a very, like, their business plan is to cater only to these high-end architects. And it's just interesting. It's different than what mine is. And I've kind of, I would like to build more for some of these higher end architects. And, we can do the work. We've got the chops, the quality to do that. And I don't know if it's our brand, it's the relationship. Sometimes I wonder, as a builder, because we get so many of our clientele that come directly to us. And we talked about this before in other podcasts, like, where does the client come from? Do they, in our market, they traditionally will come to the builder first, and then we'll interview architects and then designers. Down in Texas, I had heard that they go to designers first, and it's just funny how geographically around the country, this process is somewhat different. And every person needs to respect the other person. But when you do, man, it's three reindeer that are hauling Santa's sleigh we can all be Rudolph in this analogy, I guess.
Yeah, there's no doubt. It's amazing. And that's why it's important to network, right? Because you get to understand, how you can maybe use those strategies in other markets and hone in on them in there in Minnesota.
Yeah, well, we're out of time. We could talk for hours. Thank you very much for coming on, Brad. And I hope no one else gives you an intro quite like that. I don't have an exit even remotely close to that intro. Where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so AFT Construction, our company name is A Finer Touch Construction, but aftconstruction.com. All of our handles are AFT Construction. Most of them are underscore, but LinkedIn, Brad Leavittof, and YouTube, Pinterest, Instagram, all of them are AFT Construction. So,
all right, excellent. And for those listening, they'll all be on the website and the notes as well. Brad, as always, it's a pleasure, and thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mark.